Welcome to another edition of Joe and the Fatman. Joe Smeltzer, Kyle Fatman Golik, Nittany Sports Now here. And although I didn't think to edit the title of this, I set us to go live earlier this morning in the afternoon. This Monday afternoon, James Franklin was officially hired to be the next head football coach at Virginia Tech, and that is going to be the main focus of this episode. Kyle, we've known this was coming for a while, or should I say, we've known this could be coming for a while. Really, it wasn't too long after Franklin was fired at Penn State that people connected the dots. All right, Virginia Tech has an opening. Maybe there's something to this, and there certainly ended up being something to it. And Franklin is officially going to be the next head coach at Virginia Tech. And we said for a while that it would be a good fit, and I don't think our opinions have changed on that.
No, it hasn't, Joe. This is a home run hire for Virginia Tech. This is a program that has been meddling for almost a decade and a half. The last 4 or 5 years of Frank Beamer. I mean, they were up there for a cup of coffee under Fuente. Brenton Pry never got it going whatsoever. This is everything and anything that Virginia Tech needs as a program. You have a coach that understands how to dominate the Commonwealth of Virginia. He understands how to make things happen. This is the crazy thing. If you take away the name James Franklin and you hear, oh, this Virginia Tech hired a coach that led one of 4 programs to 7 or more top 12 finishes in the college football playoff era, you'd be wondering, if Virginia Tech can get that, why? Where's Penn State at? And you know what? If you then put in the names, you might go, oh, and there will always be those sorts of comments about the big game woes. But let me tell you something. I've seen programs like Nebraska tank. I've seen programs like Tennessee, Miami, USC. We can go on and on. The heat is on, as Glenn Fry once wrote for the Beverly Hills Cop movies.
Oh, good song.
It is.
Our views just jumped from 4 to 18 in like a second. I don't know what I'm happy about. I don't know what happened there though. But yeah, you're right. There's a lot of advantages Franklin's going to have. His recruiting in the DMV was a strength at Penn State. Penn State got some of the best players of the James Franklin area from that DC, Maryland, and Virginia area. Olu Fashanu for one, Tyler Warren, Chop Robinson, even though he was a transfer, still counts. I think so. Yeah, you have the recruiting benefits. You have not playing in the Big Ten. The ACC stinks. Virginia Tech can take advantage of that if they're able to get some quality players together, which they should be, because there's going to be a lot of guys from Penn State going to the transfer portal that end up at Virginia Tech. I think it's safe to say we don't know who it's going to be yet. We don't know when it's going to happen, but there's definitely going to be a good bit of talent from this Penn State team that's going to Virginia Tech. And there's going to be some coaches, I think, that are going. Now, I'm not saying that Franklin is going to recreate his entire last Penn State coaching staff at Virginia Tech. I don't think we're going to see Andy Kotelnicki calling the plays in Blacksburg. But could we see Anthony Poindexter calling the defense in Blacksburg? I think that's a much more realistic possibility. So, yeah, this will have a ripple effect. This is going to Penn State's got some good young players that we're seeing in this youth movement under Terry Smith, and some of those guys, could Darius Dixon be playing for Virginia Tech? Could Chaz Coleman be playing? Who knows? But there's certainly a lot of young talent to go around that Franklin will be able to pick from his last Penn State team.
100%. Right now, James Franklin is now on the offensive. Right now, Pat Kraft is, unless he knows who he's getting, he, from our perspective and vantage point, Penn State right now is on the defensive and definitely reeling, because you got a motivated Franklin, because Think about what James Franklin was like every time he played Maryland. It was personal to him. And you saw some of the most lopsided scores because he felt slighted by how that all turned about of him not being able to succeed at Phrygian down there. And you got James Franklin motivated about I'm just gonna put it out there. Pat Kraft unceremoniously fired him mid-season. Okay, you're gonna have, you go from the UCLA game to Northwestern, and in with it's always going to be like the JFK Zapruder film and all the above. When did you know what and everything with it? When did I think you and I would agree, Joe. If Penn State would have held on for a 1-point win against Northwestern, James isn't fired at that point. Okay.
Billy Napier got fired after a win. Jimbo Fisher, like, I'm not saying it definitely would have happened here, but
Well, yeah, that's I don't see it. So it's always going to be, when did Pat know he was going to do it? What authority did he have in this? We're going through that. You got a motivated James Franklin right now in your backyard. He knows every single high school in the DMV. He has the relationships. If there's one thing James was phenomenal at, relationships. So take that into consideration here, as this is huge for him, and Penn State's got to figure out, okay, because when we saw the downturn of Penn State in the dark ages of Joe Paterno in the early 2000s, guess who was a top 5, top 10 program, Joe?
yep, Frank Beamer and Virginia Tech.
No coincidence that they were able to shut off the Virginia and Maryland and DC pipeline pretty well to ensure that Penn State wasn't getting those kids.
Yeah, and perhaps as big as anything is that Virginia Tech has proposed a 200 sorry, our own YouTube video was playing there. But Virginia Tech has proposed a $230 million budget increase to its athletic department. I don't know if it's been approved yet, but
It
I
has.
don't think it has been.
Whit Babcock presented that in August. And that's so when they removed Pry, Babcock wasn't able to be part of this coaching search. That was where Eddie Royal and Bruce Arians were on that committee to do that. And a lot of it has to do with significant investments, because Virginia Tech's put in a lot in football, men's basketball, wrestling, and they're looking to really shore up the Commonwealth into Tennessee and into the Carolinas for them, and even getting into the DMV as well.
Yeah, and this is what we've seen at Indiana, right? Kurt Signetti had more to work with than Tom Allen did, and therefore, and not to discredit what Kurt Signetti has done as a football coach, but they've invested a lot into that program, and that would help any coach. And I think Franklin is going to have advantages at Virginia Tech that Brent Pry and Justin Fuente frankly didn't have.
James Franklin knows how to build a program. Like, a lot of people forget what type of job James Franklin did rehabilitating the image of Penn State, becoming and rebranding the whole school, and really turning it into an it school. It's unfortunate that James Franklin had to play opposite of peak Ohio State, with Urban Meyer winning like 90% of his games, and Ryan Day has spent every game of his career at coaching at Ohio State except one in the top 10. It's unfortunate. Franklin knows how to be successful. It goes back to what I was saying in my opening little rant there. Virginia Tech just got a whale. Penn State, for what, and look, in Pat we trust right now, Joe. In Pat we trust. But that trust, now a move has happened. So now the pressure has now escalated for Pat, because at the end of the day, Franklin, it knows how to attack Penn State. He knows, and he has had time to reflect on what had ultimately failed. Because, Joe, any longtime Penn State fans can talk about seasons like this that just went completely off kilter. So, I'm going to throw one out there that probably Terry Smith, you know, had graduated in 91. But if you remember that 91 Penn State team that finished number 3 in the country, they had an upset loss to USC, which was uncharacteristic. But the game that set up 1992 was the Miami game. And Penn State in 91 played Miami really well down at the old Orange Bowl. It was 26-20. And so in 92, Penn State started either 4 or 5-0. It was, Paterno pulled out all the stops for that game, and they couldn't beat Miami. And they went from they were 5-0 because Penn State would then lose 5 of their next 7, completely going from being a national championship contender to playing in the Blockbuster Bowl against Stanford for the Legends and Genius matchup with Bill Walsh. Think about this. Even the 99 team, they got stunned, early against Minnesota, if I'm not mistaken. And then that carried over to Michigan. And then that carried over to Michigan State, which is still one of the oddest losses in Penn State history. In some ways, Joe, and I think you're hearing it in my tone. Like, I don't know if Pat's going to find, like, out of the gate, and I'm going to preface this, out of the gate, that home run hire. Could it become one? 100%. But we don't, it's going to definitely be either someone unproven or someone that has shown that they've elevated programs. One of the things I'm going to give colleagues of ours, over at the Nittany Dispatch show, John Sauber, one of the things he made a good point on, kind of why he's been reporting people like Marcus Freeman and Kalen DeBoer and Mike Elko, is Pat knows he needs to make a hire. So he's, to Pat's credit, why you're seeing a lot of people get rich after it comes out like Penn State's talking to them is because every school knows Penn State can open up that checkbook, but in the same vein, close don't mean crap. And we're trying to make this still a family show here. And look, I'm not going to give Pat Kraft credit for making these coaches a hell of a lot richer. Look, I applaud him for going for it, but at the end of the day, much like he said at his press conference, it's a results-based business, Pat. So now the onus is on you to figure it out.
Yeah, so talking about the current interim head coach, one Terry Smith. This is being recorded Monday night. Monday afternoon, Smith had his weekly press conference and he broke down in tears talking about the outpouring of support he's gotten from the Penn State community upon his first win at Michigan State, which we talked about live in East Lansing on Saturday night. Kyle, you were in the press conference. I think everybody's at the same consensus to that. But what kind of went through your mind when Terry Smith really wore his heart on his sleeve for a few minutes there?
So, I want our viewers to understand how hard it is to win a football game. It is so hard. It is incredibly hard. And it's incredibly hard when you already have a group that, let's be honest, Joe, and this is where it's going to get into Terry. This team put all their eggs into the basket for that Oregon game. And when they lost Oregon, it unraveled. Like, it's just, you can see it. Like, it's just, they'll, no one will admit it now, but you talk to some of the people on this team in the next couple of years, they'll tell you they were tight, and then it just unraveled. Like, you could tell the difference when you look at some of the players that spoke during the streak. So unfortunately, you know, when you get your Terry Smith, you lose a brother in James Frank. Because look, Terry even said, "That's my brother." He's, James would tell him, "If anything happened to me, you're the guy." And that gets thrusted upon him. And understand the full weight of what was just thrown onto Terry Smith. You have to try to salvage this season, this program, the recruiting class. You have to essentially keep Penn State afloat in such uncertain times. Caveat, there's no guarantee that Terry Smith is going to be retained. Can you imagine the amount of effort that goes into it? And add on to that, you got to go to one of the top 5 defenses at the time in the country, in Iowa, and then face the top 2 teams in the country consecutive. And you've lost your starting quarterback. What made Saturday awesome was seeing them finally be successful. Any fan out there, and I'm just going to say this because I'm going to repeat something Brennan said on the Nitwits, and I agree with them. If you're out there saying the end of, like, they're carrying Terry Smith off the field, like, where are we as a program because they carried off a coach that beat the worst team in the Big Ten? It's not about that. That shows how short-sighted you are. You know why that happened? That team gave it its all for 6 weeks trying to figure it out, and they finally did, and they did it for a coach they were willing to lay it down on the line for. That's why Terry Smith got carried off. So when come the Monday, when I believe it was Audrey who asked Terry, which led to the tears, you start to realize, this is a man that's authentic to the core. Like, there is no BS manufactured answer. What he's saying is what he's given you. And in that moment where he's reflecting to come up with a proper answer, the emotions of, I've been there. I've been in a Terry Smith, not necessarily to the stress magnitude,
Right.
but I've been in a situation where I reflected on something and I got emotional like that. It goes to show, like, if anything that I would say for me, what I took away from it, and I know how hard it is, but I don't think people realize how hard this man is working. This man is putting in it all. And you saw a rare glimpse of emotion behind it.
Yeah, and people thought that they knew the full story with Terry Smith and Penn State, right? He played there. He ended up coaching with James Franklin. He was the only position coach or coordinator to be on Franklin's staff for all 11 and a half years at Penn State. So the story seems straightforward, but with him answering John Sauber's follow-up question about why Penn State means so much to him, and talking about how he grew up in Aliquippa in the Pittsburgh area, which he described as not a nice place, and he was able to move to Monroeville, which is a nicer area, and it happened because Terry Smith's father went to Penn State and was able to use what he learned there to set up his family to where they could make that move and get in a better situation. So yeah, it was just very powerful all the way around, and it segues into. We weren't going to mention this on the past few shows because it seemed obvious that Terry Smith wouldn't really be in the game as far as becoming the full-time head coach. But now that people are talking about it, now that Penn State has a win, and now that people are in the emotions from what happened after Saturday's game and what happened during Monday's press conference, I think it's appropriate to talk about just, is Terry Smith a viable candidate for the Penn State head coaching job? I personally don't feel any differently than I did before Saturday's game, but Fatman, how do you feel?
Look, I get people's are in the fields, but if I'll be honest. I'm gonna just put it right out there. If you feel if you're and it's still extremely premature, you can probably criticize Pat for maybe some malpractice in how he handled the Franklin situation, but it's still a bit premature. Okay, if he made the decision to make Terry Smith the head coach based on emotions, you he is a fool. And no fan like and look, I might get burned and eviscerated by it, but you don't make decisions based on emotions, because emotions are simply temporary, because the decisions that Pat has to make have long-term consequences. And when you just go off of the emotion of them finally getting it together, it's a great story. I love it. It has all the human interest angles in the world. But Joe, when you and this is any walk of life, whatever emotional decisions that you can do, if Pat were to go down and just say this is our guy, it brings in inconsistency, bias, and then there's often regret with these. So you got to let logic go. If Pat sees Terry go the next several weeks with this, and Penn State were to pull a winning streak together and get to a bowl game, and say they do finish 7-6, and Terry seems to have command of the program, let's revisit it then. But right now, it's making a decision based off of emotions would be a disaster.
Yeah, and I just think some people are better in other roles than head coaches. And Terry Smith has no head coaching experience, has no coordinator experience, and he just seems to be one of those guys in those roles. And I say that with all the respect in the world for what Terry Smith did before all this happened and what he's doing during this situation. But in there, I will say there's also been some decisions that have been questionable. Terry Smith will be the first to tell you he hasn't done a perfect job as far as X's and O's go in his time at Penn State. It took too long for them to throw the ball down the field. Terry admitted that. Guys like Kobe Howard weren't used right away, which they probably should have been. And Terry has owned up to all of that. But as far as the evidence of Terry Smith being, full-time head coaching material, we know he can motivate. Well, we know his players love him. We know he can recruit. But there just isn't enough there as far as actually doing the job that I would be comfortable with naming him the full-time head coach. And you have to consider, there's been, in my time on the Penn State beat, there have been 3 changes at defensive coordinator. It was Brent Pride and Manny Diaz to Tom Allen, and Tom Allen to Jim Knowles. And Terry Smith wasn't really thought to be a serious candidate for the coordinator job in any of them. And then that's not me trying to disrespect Terry Smith at all. I'm just saying it kind of puts into perspective of how some people, the full-time head coach at Penn State is a lot to handle, and there's a lot that needs to go into that as far as the resume goes. And I just don't see the evidence that Terry Smith is a full-time head coaching type of guy. I think he's great in a lot of roles. Full-time head coach, I wouldn't go in that direction.
The only thing I'm going to say, Joe, that may counter what you just said, and this is what we're going to learn over the next few weeks, what we have with Terry to kind of do it. He spent nearly a decade as Penn State's assistant head coach to James Franklin. Like, he was number 2. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
How much was he number 2? How much did he glean? How good is he? We're going to find out. Again, it's just you can't make decisions based off of emotions. And like I said, let's see what they do, because if this team does win, say the final 2, goes to a bowl, wins a bowl, and finishes 7-6, and you look at the whole Terry Smith experience, 4 wins potentially, 2 1-point. I think they had under him, they had a 1-point loss, a field goal loss, 3-point loss, I should say, to Indiana, and then Ohio State's Ohio State. Again, if you feel comfortable, you're Pat's going to have to, this is like, you want to make sure you're not hiring Ed Orgeron. That's all I'm going to say.
If they had beat Indiana and beat Iowa along with beating Michigan State, let's throw Ohio State out. That was never going to be a win, no matter who was the coach. I think Pat Kraft would have a lot to think about there. But
Oh yeah, if Terry would go, say, including with the bowl, 6-1. Oh yeah, Terry would probably be the lead candidate. Let's be honest. Like,
I agree.
think about how much blowback USC got when Ed Orgeron went 6-2 and they didn't go with him. There's no way Penn State is going to would have. We're in if land, and I don't like to spend too much time there. But if Terry Smith would have been 6-1, yeah, he's probably the successor to Franklin. But the fact of the matter is, the best, if Terry Smith's 4-3, I'm going to say this, Joe. He at least earned serious considerations for interviews, and that's
I agree, with that. Yeah.
yeah, that's where I'm at with that.
Yeah, and speaking of interviews, Terry Smith said during his Monday presser that he has not had a formal interview with Pat Kraft yet. And he put it well. He said he feels that his interview is everything he does when he's sitting in that head coach's chair. So take that for what it's worth. It's definitely believable. Terry's been very honest in press conferences. He's known as the ultimate truth teller, and I think there's no reason he wouldn't be telling the truth on that, because Pat Kraft knows what Terry Smith's all about. He sees it every day. And doing formal interviews just doesn't really seem necessary. But for Terry Smith to keep these good vibes going, he's going to have to beat Nebraska. Nebraska's a team that records can be deceiving. I think we would all agree that Penn State is the best 4-6 team college football has had, maybe in a little bit, right? With the talent on this roster and with the sheer unluckiness of some of their losses. Nebraska's a bit of the other way. Nebraska is 7-3, but it doesn't really feel like a 7-3 football team. You look at their resume, you got a good win over Cincinnati week 1. But after that, you beat Akron, Houston Christian, not going to impress everybody there. You lose to Michigan at home, give up 27 to a horrible Michigan State team and win by 11. Almost lose to Mike Loxley in Maryland on the road, get embarrassed at Minnesota, squeak out one against Northwestern, lose a close one to USC and Lincoln, and then get what was actually a pretty decent win 2 weeks ago at UCLA before the bye week with the debut of TJ Latif, who is the successor to Dylan Raiola, who's out for the season. Replacement would be a better word for that. But yeah, it's pretty interesting how Kyle, Penn State doesn't feel like a 4-6 team. Nebraska doesn't feel like a 7-3 team, and hence Penn State being double-digit favorites going into this game.
Yeah, I'm still perplexed by the double-digit favorites. I get Nebraska's kind of reeling after the Dylan Raiola injury. Latif has been pretty good, Joe. I mean, he's completed nearly every one of his passes. I think he only has 4 or 5 incompletions, and he's averaging nearly 14 yards an attempt. So you start looking at it and you're going, okay, but where is their strength? And their strength, it comes from Emmett Johnson. So, I know he's up there in the Big Ten for rushing stats. I was looking at it today as I was filling out my All-American teams, and he had major consideration because I know he has like 1,500 scrimmage yards and like 15 total touchdowns in that vicinity of. But this is a team where Penn State has struggled with the run, and Latif has shown he can be mobile and be deadly doing it. So it's one of those things. And look, they're defensively sound. Like, I know most people are looking at this and saying, "What do you mean, Kyle?" Grant you, they're sus a little bit against the run, but they've done a great job with pass defense. I mean, quarterbacks are barely doing 55% completion percentage on them, I believe. They're under 300 yards total offense. So, this is going to be the challenge because in my mind, Joe, I know you framed it as Penn State's probably better than what their record is and Nebraska's worse. This is one of those matchups I feel like it's dead even, in my opinion. I think Nebraska has a lot of talent, and it's just Penn State's void of certain pieces due to injuries and etc. This is really the test because I feel if they can get past this, they're going to beat Rutgers. So I'm excited for this one.
Yeah, and we have to remember what betting lines are, right? It's not necessarily a prediction of how the game's going to go. It's, getting the same amount of bets placed um, for a team to cover the spread or not cover the spread. And I think that's where I think 10.5 is the spread. I think that's where that comes from because, vibes are really high off Penn State with the win, with the emotion involving Terry Smith. Vibes are probably a little low on Nebraska right now because they haven't really looked impressive in Big Ten play. They've won, but they haven't looked impressive. As I mentioned, with squeaking out one against a bad UCLA team that's we're officially down from the Tim Skipper, Jerry Neuheisel honeymoon. You lose to USC, having to squeak one out against Northwestern, losing badly in Minnesota. Yeah, I feel that a lot of people, I'm not saying I feel this way, but a lot of people are probably feeling pretty good about Penn State to win this game by a decent amount of points. And that's where the vibes are, and that's really where point spreads come from. That comes from the vibes and how people are feeling. We'll get into our predictions. I'm gonna say Penn State wins, but does not cover the spread. I think this feels like a 31-24 type of deal. And I think Penn State is going to struggle a bit defensively, with mobile quarterbacks. They have had a hard time all season with, as you mentioned, Nebraska having Emmett Johnson, one of the best running backs in the country, and 4.25s are susceptible against the run. I think that might give Penn State some problems, but I also think that Katron Allen's on an absolute heater right now. Nebraska has one of the worst run defenses in the Big Ten, and if Penn State could throw the ball against Indiana, I think they could do it against Nebraska. So I do think that Penn State is going to be able to spread the field enough. So Nebraska can't necessarily stack up the box on every single play and contain Katron Allen. So I think Penn State's going to score. I think Nebraska's going to give them some problems too. So I'll go 34, not no, 31-24. That's going to be my prediction. Maybe it's a little higher scoring, maybe it's a little lower scoring, but that's how I'm feeling right now.
This is tough, Joe, and I'm gonna and I haven't been good with the predictions all year whatsoever. I think this is going to be a heavyweight fight. I really, really do, and I think it's going to come down to the final minute. I think the I think the football gods are going to shine a little bit Saturday night on Penn State. It's not. It's going to be one. It's going to be a good senior day. I just think if that Prowler package that Terry alluded to earlier has been unlocked and this team is just feeling it right now, and if they can pass, okay, at key times to keep Nebraska's defense honest from stacking the box, I think Penn State will win this game. I'm going to go with I'm going to go 27-23 Penn State.
All right, so we're both forecasting close wins. You mentioned senior night, Kyle. The legacy of this 2022 class, because this came in, it was the highest rated class under James Franklin. It was at a time when Penn State hadn't been doing well. The COVID year ended up being a disaster, going 4-5, starting 0-5. The year after that, Penn State, it was like this year in a sense where they had a lot of hard luck losses that would have been wins in different years, but they ended up finishing 7-6. So entering 2022, fans were thinking about the future. And when the current product isn't great, you're focused on recruiting. So a lot of guys were under a microscope. And of course, when you have prospects like Drew Aller, the top prep quarterback, Nick Singleton, the top prep running back, Katron Allen, blue chip running back, denied Dennis Sutton, who wreaked havoc against Michigan State last week, Abdul Carter, who is now in the NFL, KJ Winston's now in the NFL. There was a lot expected of these guys. And it's kind of sad that people are going to see this group as a failure because of how the 2025 season has turned out. But I don't really see it that way. I think Terry Smith mentioned them at the top, not at the top, but during his presser that this class for 3 years they were part of the winningest 3 year period in Penn State history. And it's hard to call a class that's had that success a failure. And these guys weren't, it's not like 2022, there were no freshmen doing anything. From year 1 through year 4, the guys in this class have played a big part in Penn State football. So yeah, it could have been better. The 2025 season obviously is what it is, but I think overall these guys had a lot of success at Penn State and should be remembered favorably.
Anyone who thinks that this class was a failure, you just don't know ball, and that's all I'm gonna put it as this. This was the winningest 3-year stretch for Penn State in program history. It's not even close. All right. It's the winningest 3-year stretch since 1980 to 1982. All right. Let's understand this. Penn State went 40 plus years before getting this consistency. Did they have a disappointing ending? 100%. You won't hear me argue. The word failure should not be in anyone's mouth about this group. I mean, these guys participated in, I believe, 6 postseason games total, if I'm not mistaken. So you had the Rose Bowl in 22, the Peach Bowl in 23. They had the Big Ten championship game. They had the first round playoff game. They had the Fiesta Bowl, and then they had the Orange Bowl. They played in 6 postseason games in three years, guys. That's impressive. All right, great. And I think they went 3-3 in those because they got the Rose Bowl, the first round playoff, and the Fiesta Bowl. So this is a very, very, very successful group. Could it have been more? Absolutely. You won't hear me argue it. But this senior day should be a last chance to say thank you to this class.
Yeah, well said. And as we wrap this up, let's kind of end this with an ode to Katron Allen, right? If anybody had an excuse to pack it in, it would have been Katron Allen. Fans were clamoring all season for him to be the number 1 guy. There was no reason for him not to be the number 1 guy. He never fully became the number 1 guy when James Franklin was the coach. And that's not me, dunking on Franklin. That's just the facts. It never happened. Game 1 for game 6, even though Katron Allen consistently outrushed Nick Singleton. And again, no disrespect to Nick Singleton, but those are the facts. He outrushed him. The offense was better when he was in there. Nick Singleton didn't really get going, but for whatever reason, Katron was the 1B back at best and the number 2 back at worst. It never made any sense. But to Terry Smith's credit and Andy Kotelnicki's credit, they have emphasized Katron Allen. The first game under Terry Smith, he had 28 carries. His previous high was 16 at Iowa, and he dominated against Iowa, and he deserved to get a win against Iowa. 145 yards and 2 touchdowns on those 28 carries. Then, nothing really happening too much against Ohio State and Indiana. I think Penn State was still working through its vertical passing game there, and the numbers aren't good. 76 yards against Ohio State, but only 3.6 yards per carry. 48 yards on 19 carries against Indiana and a fumble. A little bit of a 2-game slump, but then Michigan State, man. It helped that Penn State was able to stretch the field and show they could do it. But 181 yards on 25 carries and 2 touchdowns, that's a career day. And that was a career high for Katron Allen. And because of that career high, there is a chance, and more than an outside chance, Katron Allen needs 139 yards to break Evan Royster's all-time Penn State rushing record. You can't say for sure that he'll get it against Nebraska, but I think barring anything unfortunate over these last 2 games, Katron should be able to break that record. And first off, as a prediction, Kyle, do you think he breaks the record this week against Nebraska? And is what Katron Allen's been able to do this season, just pushing through, keeping the same energy, playing better as the situation got more tougher and as Penn State had less to play for, does this make him a Penn State icon?
Without question, he's a Penn State icon. There's no doubt in my mind. Is he the most accomplished? No. Will he most likely be the all-time leading rusher? Yeah. He's an icon. He played in some of the more meaningful games and had some signature moments. Here's my bold predictions for Nebraska. You ready for this, Joe? You sitting down there?
Yeah.
Katron Allen will get at least 139 yards rushing and will pass Evan Royster on senior day. And we're going to throw an and in there. Nick Singleton will at least tie Saquon Barkley for most touchdowns from scrimmage in Penn State history. I think we're going to have a historic Saturday night. I firmly believe Terry's gassing up those 2 guys and basically saying, look, we're riding and dying with you. So be ready to, we're going to run you until the wheels come off. And if that's his mentality, that bodes well for Nick and Katron. I think Katron's going to get the lion's share of carries. I think they're going to try to find creative ways to use Nick. So I think Nick's going to get a touchdown. He'll match Saquon, but I think Katron Allen's going to get 139 or 140 and barely eke past Evan Royster all time.
I think he does too, and I think it's because this is a Big Ten football game. It's late November. It's going to be cold. This is Big Ten football with 2. I know Nebraska's not a traditional Big Ten team, but like with 2 traditional college football powers going at it, it has all the makings for a Katron Allen type of football game, and I think that's what we're going to see. I do. I'm going to look up what the wind is going to be because as Joe Tiller used to say, the wind is the only thing that would affect a quarterback's ability to throw the football. So let me be a weatherman here for what the weather is going to be Saturday night. By the way, the game is going to be on NBC with Penn State great Todd Blackledge on the call. The nighttime, the winds are supposed to be 9 miles per hour. This is as of Monday. This could change. Is 9 miles an hour that much? It doesn't really sound like it. That's not my area of expertise, but
I'd call New England Patriot fans and ask them about the inflation of balls and wind and see if they can let us know.
Yeah, but in any case, the reason I bring all this up is Penn State has to keep the vertical passing game going. It was there in the second half against Indiana. It wasn't there necessarily consistently against Michigan State, but that 75-yard touchdown pass from Ethan Grunkemeyer to Devontae Ross ended up opening the floodgates for the running game because Michigan State knew that the vertical pass was there. So that's something to keep an eye on too. But that's going to do it for this episode of Joe and the Fat Man. Joe Smeltzer, Kyle Golik, Nittany Sports Now. Thank you very much for tuning in, and we'll have plenty of coverage between now and Saturday's game against Nebraska.
Good night, Canada.